Welcome everyone to episode 23 of Future Strong, the show that discusses everything that's relevant to future talent. And we are delighted to have our special guest this week, Liz Wessel from WayUp. And we're going to get you to introduce yourself in a second, Liz, but very quickly, I'm Nikki Garchea. Hello, everyone. And I am the co-founder of Capfinity. Capfinity is a strengths-based organisation, and we run recruitment and talent development sessions across the globe. And I'm joined by my co-host, whose background is changing every week. We've got the chair, we've got the throw, but it's better than the days when I watched you get chased by bears, Lindsay Pollock.
Thank you, Nikki. We were reminiscing for a long time, Future Strong listeners, about the days when my rural train would go by. I should tell you, I am testing paint colors. So next time, hopefully one of these will be on the wall behind me. So for those of you following at home with the office renovations, we've got Fred Burke in the house. Good morning. Please, everybody, introduce yourselves in the chat. We'd love to hear where you are watching from. And as always, we love your questions. My name is Lindsay Pollock. I'm a career and workplace expert. I'm the author of 4 books. My latest is Recalculating, Navigate Your Career Through the Changing World of Work. And I'm a very proud brand ambassador for Capfinity and very excited to announce that Nikki is going to be government pending in New York City in a couple of weeks so that we can
exciting.
Frolic on the town together. We can't wait. But most importantly, and keep introducing yourselves, we'll give everyone a shout out in a moment. I am so delighted to introduce our very special guest and friend, Liz Wessel. Liz, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and WayUp for those who are not familiar? Welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you. And hi, everyone. Lindsay, Nikki, thank you as always so much for, having me. This is awesome. So my name is Liz Wessel. I'm the co-founder and CEO at WayUp. WayUp, for those unfamiliar, is a platform that helps employers achieve their DEI hiring goals. But most importantly, it helps candidates from all backgrounds get hired. And so we're US-based only, unfortunately, today. But I say that unfortunately, not for too long, because we hope to be in Europe, specifically in the UK, in the next year or so. So very excited about that. But outside of that, we also, just one other kind of piece, is we also recently, about 3.5, 4 months ago, merged with a company called Yellow. For those who are unfamiliar with Yellow, they're one of the largest software platforms for university recruiting teams. I might use the acronym UR throughout, so that's what I'm referring to if I say university UR, but for university recruiting teams to really drive more efficiencies throughout their recruitment process. So yeah, thank you so much again for having me.
Thanks, Liz. And I'm so excited to hear that you're going to come to Europe, because there'll be lots of people listening in who I know that the WayUp solution is just what they need in Europe. So that's very good news. I'd love to hear a little bit of your story, if you may, for all those people who are thinking about their futures. Just how did you come up with the idea of WayUp? What made you set it up? How have you grown the business? Just a little thing to wake us all up.
Yeah, sure. So let's see, we've been out around for about 7.5 years. So if we rewind a whole lot more than that, I was in college at the University of Pennsylvania, Penn, with my co-founder, JJ, who's our CTO, Chief Technology Officer. And at the time when we were both students, I just remember seeing over and over how there were so many inefficiencies in how college students were looking for jobs and being recruited as well. It felt like a game of, if there's not an opportunity for nepotism, then you're kind of 10 steps behind everyone else. And if you're 10 steps behind everyone else and you happen to not be a white man who, and very often also a white woman, but most frequently in the world I was looking at, which was tech, a white man who already was very well connected in the industry, then there's also a very high likelihood that you're probably not going to make it to one of your top job kind of prospects. And I felt like that was just ridiculous. And meanwhile, I remember just hating a lot of the very old school traditional tactics which companies had, whether it was I have to stand in a very, very long line, hand a paper resume over to a company, shake their hand for about 2 minutes, me being nervous and, sweaty palms and feeling like, oh my God, this is like, what if I say one thing wrong, then I don't ever get a job at that company? Because I knew that those recruiters were putting a resume in one pile or the other, and that was my fate. And so JJ and I decided back in college, let's try to build a side project that can start to attack these issues, and specifically for early career candidates. And so we did, but then we graduated and I went to Google and he went to McKinsey. But over a few years while we were both at our respective companies, that website, that side project we built for a hackathon basically, kept growing and growing and growing. And we were like, wait, this is a real thing. And we both wanted to leave our jobs and start a company after a few years anyway. So we did, but we decided to really build what is WayUp today. So fast forward, we're now, now that we're merged with Yellow, we're now about 200 people and based all throughout the country. We might talk about this later, but the WayUp side is 100% remote. We got rid of our office the third month after COVID kind of hit the US, and haven't looked back since. So anyway, that's a little bit about us.
I love entrepreneurial stories. I definitely want to pick up on that office change. I just wanted to welcome some of our watchers who are here with us live. So many good friends. We've got Fred, Jeff, Trish from Sanibel Island, Florida, Chris Whitney, hello from Scranton, Pennsylvania, Dee from San Diego, Geta, welcome from San Antonio, and Marty is watching from Chicago. Please continue to introduce yourselves and engage with us in the chat, and we love your questions. Liz, you talked about giving up your office. I'd love to hear, both from an entrepreneur perspective of running WayUp and also the product or the platform itself, what have been the biggest changes over the past 18 months that either you've implemented or you've observed in the platform, and maybe even in university recruiting and DEI overall?
Yeah, I think that so just to start in general for all companies, whether they're university recruiting teams, with a DEI focus or just small startups like mine, I think the biggest change we've seen is that people have realized you can't just slap the word virtual on top of everything and call it a success and call it a switch, to remote. The fact is that a lot of companies are still doing that, and they are not winning the war on talent, whether it be retention or hiring. Just to give a few examples, especially for anyone on the call who's maybe not a hiring manager. When you have direct reports and you're in person with them and you are telling them something that's really important, or you're giving them really tough feedback, really positive feedback, you look them in the eyes, and maybe you're talking to a group of 10 people on your team to really talk about a really important strategy. You look each of them in the eyes and can build that connection. When you're on a virtual call, it's much harder to build that connection. Like Nikki can't say that I'm looking at her eyes right now, and now I'm looking at Lindsay's eyes. They can't see that. And you lose a lot of things when you go virtual, but as a result, you don't have to lose them permanently. You just have to add other aspects to kind of make up for those gaps. And so what I've seen just from like myself, and then I'll obviously apply this to the university recruiting world and TA world in general, is that I've started over the last year and a half, I've asked more about people's, how's your family doing, more about just showing them I care, which I obviously do, than I ever did purposefully before, because the fact is that before it would come much more naturally at a water cooler over lunch. And now those moments don't often happen. And so I'm making the time, and I think the best leaders are. So kind of bringing that over to the talent acquisition world, a lot of these same trends and themes absolutely apply. It's funny, I'm sure we'll talk about Zoom fatigue, which a lot of TA people love to talk about, but don't necessarily have the data to prove. But a lot of companies love to talk about, all of these students, they just hate being virtual. They just want to go back to career fairs and back to in-person. And I sit there and I'm like, way before COVID, most of these college students were on this thing and their computer all day, every day. And after COVID, they're still going to be on their computer and phones all day, every day. And so a lot of them actually really didn't like, whether it be career fairs or, having to fly all over to do different interviews. And so the fact is that, and I don't want to make it a one size fits all solution, but if you are going to engage students and candidates virtually, you need to bring the equivalent of how is your husband doing? How's your day? Oh, tell me more about the background of your wall and why you're thinking about changing the color and all of that. And so just one example of that, a lot of companies throw virtual info sessions on WayUp. The ones that we see consistently are getting the highest engagement rates, actual show up rates, and then of course apply rates after, are the ones who are not showing up saying, this is an info session all about why want to use a fake company, I'll use Google, my former employer, which is a great company for the record. So what I say is not going to represent them, I promise. But they wouldn't show up and say like, here's why Google's a great place to work, and have that be the entire session. Instead, it might be more about, and I'll throw out an example of Visa. Visa has one of the most impressive cyber security teams in the world. So their whole session was all about how to like hack into the world's largest financial systems. And it was a session by the cybersecurity team. And who do you think was joining that session? Potential cybersecurity hires. So it's just an example of like bringing a lot more unique personalization and less of the generic stuff, and really trying to cater to standing out in a virtual world.
And in contrast, Liz, you mentioned some of the mistakes. Have you seen some really great examples? That one of Visa is fab. What are some of the best things that you've seen the most enlightened companies doing during these times?
So I'll give 3 examples of things that I've seen really well. And then I'm happy to also talk about a few mistakes I've been seeing companies make a lot of. So the first one is focusing on data and not anecdotes. Nikki and I think we'll be doing this session in about a month about evaluations and assessments and how they can play a role in helping create a fair and equitable and more efficient process in your recruitment. And the fact is that anyone who ever argues otherwise, it's like, just look at the data as opposed to anecdotes. And what I see a lot of the time, and I'll give you a few examples of that, is that these companies say, my whole problem with DEI is, why I don't have enough Black or Hispanic or female or LGBTQIA+ candidates is that they're just not applying for my jobs. I just need a sourcing platform that will solve that. And just to anyone who's thinking, oh, that's me, like, we've got one, so feel free to reach out. But at WayUp, the fact is that very rarely solves the entire problem. It solves a big chunk of the problem, but I like to equate it to a game of whack-a-mole, where you're like, you whack that mole, if you will, but then there's problems all throughout the rest of your process. Maybe you have completely, maybe you do have an evaluation. We know of one programming assessment that every single one of our clients who uses it, Black and Hispanic candidates, are 2.5x less likely to pass that than white and Asian candidates. Native American candidates also less likely. And when you look at the data why, it's the same reasons as the SATs. It's ultimately the highest correlation for this assessment from all of our data and studies we've done is to socioeconomic status, which unfortunately in this country has very high correlation to race and ethnicity, in the US at least. And so it's just one of those opportunities where if you look at analytics, you might find where the holes are in your process. Maybe you have a job description that the first sentence has the word guys in it and you just didn't realize that. And as a result, no women are converting to applicants after they view your job. So my point is that analytics, and stop focusing so much on anecdotes. That's why literally all of 2019 and 2020, almost our entire product roadmap was just DEI analytics to help empower our partners, our clients, to be able to find where their actual problems are. So that's the first one. The second one we talked about was meaningful employer branding. I think companies that have really taken an authentic approach to talking about their employer brand have been the ones that have really stood out in the DEI game. It's absolutely fascinating to see companies say, we care so much about DEI, and you go to their career page and every single person is a white man. It's pretty fascinating how many companies speak to me about how all the things they're doing, and they're all like scholarships, sponsorships, like throwing money at the problem, when it's like, let's turn around and look at yourself. And maybe you are actually embodying this and you're just not necessarily doing the best job of showing it. So it's a funny and weird thing, because it's like, you don't want to come off as bragging about what you're doing, but the fact is that how else are people going to find out? And then I would say the third one is that a lot of companies have stopped saying, we're going to just attend all these career fairs and call it a day, but they're instead hosting their own virtual events. So branded virtual events that are all about you and talking about your commitment to diversity, or, what makes this team at your company really unique. Those are 3 of the things we've seen have driven the most positive results for DEI.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I did want to point out our colleague LaToya Hodge mentioning that Liz and Nikki are going to be speaking on November 16th at 2 p.m. So that is when that event is happening. So LaToya, if you could share that in the chat, what the link is for that, that would be great. And thanks for joining us. We also have a comment from Marty. Love the side project, Liz, that turns into a viable and vibrant business. One of the principles in my career agility model is pursue it in parallel. even more impressive when it's the extra work turns into the big idea, even though you were working at a credible company like Google out of college. And I agree. I think a lot of people said, wow, this recruiting thing is terrible. Oh, well. And you actually said, let's do something to change it. I want to keep on the topic of DEI because it's obviously so critical to so many companies' strategies. Can you talk a little bit more about those companies that get it, that are using the data? How are assessments playing a role in that? Can you talk about things like GPA? What are some of the bigger trends that you're seeing? Because I think, for those watching in the UK, they're ahead of us in some ways on assessments and some of this stuff. So how is this changing just the entire model of university recruiting?
Yeah, it's a great question. A bunch of ways. Like, let's start with core school mentality as one. So a really unfortunate Band-Aid that all of a sudden, like, some of the smartest companies out there started pulling out right after the murder of George Floyd in mid-2020 was that they started saying, we're going to recruit from these 6 HBCUs and we're going to get 25 Black hires, and then 25% of our class are going to be Black, and we're going to be like golden, like now we're good. And the way that they say that, like what I just described, is not malicious in any way, obviously. They have only the most positive intent, which is we want to diversify our pipeline. And in that example, that's probably a company that has historically struggled with recruiting Black talent. That being said, do you guys know what percentage of students in the United States who are Black go to HBCUs? And HBCUs, for those watching, I'm so sorry, historically Black colleges and universities. There's a category in the US called MSI, Minority Serving Institution, and there's all kinds of MSIs. There's HSIs, there's HBCUs, there's one for, many different categories of underrepresented minorities. And the one I'm talking about that's been most in the news over the last year and a half has been HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. Our Vice President of the United States actually went to one. And so now rewinding a little bit, only about 10% of all Black students in the United States go to HBCUs. And there are not that many HBCUs in the US, about 100. So to say, we're going to make all of our Black hires, or most of our Black hires, or our solution for hiring Black candidates is going to be to go to these few schools, and then we're going to say, like, job well done, is literally only perpetuating this complete aspect of systemic inequality. If you think about the fact that instead of saying, hey, we're going to look to change how we recruit so that when a Black person from, I'll use my school, Penn, applies to our job, and a white person from Penn applies to our job, they have an equal opportunity to get hired. And then on top of that, we're going to be more proactive about sourcing the great diverse talent throughout our country. That's an approach that's saying, I care about equality and driving the same opportunity for everyone. Instead, by just saying, we're going to channel all of our focus for DEI on just a few HBCUs and then call it a day, is just one of those options where it's like you're almost saying, and then we can keep doing our same bad practices on the side for everyone else. And by the way, that everyone else tends to be the majority, because most companies are not, you get it. So I would say this HBCU Band-Aid is one example of where data can really play a pretty strong part of your decision-making process. But you mentioned GPA, and I'll dive into that for a minute. GPA is absolutely one. So the average GPA for Asian students in the United States, junior year, 4-year institution getting a bachelor's degree is a 3.4. The average GPA for a white student, 3.3. And you look at Black and Hispanic students, and it's about 2.8. So if you have a GPA minimum of 3.0, then you're automatically cutting off well more than half of the candidates who are, Black and Hispanic, also Native American. And so when you step back, is the answer because GPA correlates to intelligence and one race is smarter than another? Of course not. That's absolutely not the case. And every single scientific study that has ever been done by this, the most famous one being from Georgetown University many, many years ago, has shown actually GPA has a high correlation to one thing more than any, which is socioeconomic status. Think about, I work all day at school, and then I have part-time jobs at night. When am I going to the library? Maybe I have kids I have to take care of. People don't realize that 26% of college students in the United States have children, and the majority of those are women. And so you start to realize GPA is correlated to a whole lot more than just IQ. And I personally, and I think probably most people listening, would far more prefer hiring someone who worked their butt off during college, paid their tuition. Not that anyone who doesn't pay their tuition is not also amazing, but paid their tuition, maybe took care of family, all these other things, and happened to have a 3.0 GPA. I'm sold. I'd rather hire you than someone who spent their entire college experience in a library. So point being, I think there's a lot of actionable insights you can take from analytics that ultimately companies just haven't been doing in the past. Sorry, that was a very long. I'm very passionate about this topic, so
no, you're getting a lot of appreciation for it, and we have seen companies this year get rid of their GPA. And why have they got rid of it? A company like Accenture has got rid of GPA requirements because they've got the data to prove it doesn't predict performance in role. And I think, but it's brave still. It's just not yet the norm. And the core school thing we have in the UK with target universities, and I think we were all hoping the pandemic would, get rid of that. Time will tell. One of the things I'm really interested in from a WayUp perspective, particularly around this core school thing, is how do you persuade people that actually it's going to work, that the talent will come through? Because I think the university recruiters are often on side. The managers are scared, and it's what they know. No disrespect to all the enlightened managers who are doing it well, but how do you handle it?
Great question. We do it probably once a week. We have a huge company-wide celebration about a company that kind of transitions over to being less school dependent and more school agnostic. So and again, just so everyone is aware, what I'm saying is that when you have core schools, that's great for a lot of aspects. Building relationships with career service centers. We have a few folks from career services world on this call, and many of you I'm friends with. I love career service centers for a lot of what they do. But to say I'm not going to hire, there are literally companies that say we're not going to hire students who don't go to these 20 schools is absolutely ridiculous to me. So especially because often those 20 schools, you look at them and they're majority white. So that's a side note. But where I'm going with this is how we convince our clients is usually the first year that they partner with us. Most of our clients partner with us for many, many years. So the first year, they'll start off and we'll say, you know what, you have your core school approach. That's fine. Tell us what percentage of your hires do you want to be from core schools? It can be 100, because why would you partner with us if it's 100? So they'll often say, okay, 50%. Great. Give us the opportunity for the other 50%. Make those hires off of WayUp. It's a free platform that literally anyone who attends school in the US can use. And make those platform hires from WayUp, and let's compare the two audiences. And after the first year of hiring, they very quickly see the half that they used WayUp for is more diverse, equally as qualified, sometimes more likely to actually accept their offer. Almost never are they less. And then in terms of retained over time, that's obviously an entire, unfortunately, talent acquisition teams often don't get that data always from the HRIS. So it's harder to track. I wish I could track, because I have a very strong feeling that it would fare well and bode well. But the point being, I think that it's about testing and showing the data. And I feel like if there's one thing I've talked about on this call over and over, it's data. But I really do see that data tends to, when you arm talent acquisition professionals with data, it tends to help them win in an argument or a disagreement with the hiring manager.
So Liz, your shout out to career services yielded some love from the commenters. So I just want to welcome some friends. We've got Jamie from Babson in Massachusetts, Louise from the University of Michigan. We have our friend Chelsea Williams from College Code. So thank you to everybody. We've got Hermelinda Davis. So thank you for that shout out. What's your advice or thought to the career services people listening? So they obviously have some influence over recruiters, but not a lot, particularly someone who's from a school that maybe traditionally hasn't been on a core schools list. What do you do to engage career services, and what thoughts do you have for that audience?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll say about career services is that I can't believe it's actually shocking to me how often I hear that career service centers saying, we're on Simplicity, we're on Handshake, whatever. And recruiters, I want you to only use us, and students, you should only use us. There's a famous quote, famous at least in my mind, maybe it's not so famous. I think it was Mark Andreessen, who's a big investor in the United States, said, which is, where do you go to look for a job when you're looking for a job? And the answer is everywhere. Can you imagine saying to someone, like, I only want you to use this one platform to get a job, and then for all the companies out there that are not using that platform, of which there are many, you're going to just say, like, don't? And so luckily, we've seen career service centers go from like maybe 75% of career service centers when we started this business in 2014 were actually saying that. Now we probably hear it 10% of the time, maybe even less. So it's not that frequent, but I swear I heard it once this week, and me and a few other execs on the call like giggled about this one university. It's an MBA program where their MBA career service center is saying to all their students, don't use any other platform. And to me, that's just so old school. Like, I understand wanting to, have all the data under your arms, but you can always run surveys with your students. You should be preparing them. Manny, who I'm sure many on this call are familiar with, who has been very much an advisor and an informal advisor and mentor to me since I started the business. I remember we were at a diner when 2014, 2015, when I was first having this challenge. Trudy, who I know you both are very familiar with, introduced me to him. And Manny's sitting with me, and I said, why are career service centers doing this? And he said, it's not right if they are, because the job of career services, and I'm going to paraphrase what he said, is to get students the outcomes that they're looking for, that are at least career related. If they want to go to grad school, that's different, but to get them the career outcomes they're looking for and to provide them with the resources that they need. And so I would just say, make yourself aware that technology is not going away and that your students have access to more than they've ever had before. And you should, instead of running away from that or trying to prevent them from that, you should really embrace that.
Wise advice, and it's resonating with a lot of the people who are listening in. As we go forward, we're getting close enough to the end of another interesting year. What do you see are some of the things that we might do differently in 22 when it comes to recruiting college students? Anything that you think actually we're trailblazing now that will stay?
I think there's definitely going to go back to being a hybrid approach. I think a lot of companies are eager to get back in person. And I think a lot of students are also like eager. The professors that bring in professionals from corporates, where the corporate will come in and actually teach a course on a subject that company is like number one leader in, like that's phenomenal. And also, side note, like great authentic employer branding too. So I think you'll see a lot more of this hybrid approach of companies coming on campus in really meaningful ways. I think the career fair, I've been saying this since 2014. I was totally way too early, but I've been saying since 2014, career fairs will die eventually. And I truly believe that 2022 we'll see career fairs much less frequently. But I do think that you'll see a lot more info sessions, dinners, basically much more high quality, high engagement opportunities on campus. So I think that's a big change for 2022. That's kind of the amalgamation of all the activities that have been happening, certainly over the last 2 years since the pandemic hit. And then, of course, before that, with in-person being the majority of how companies spent billions, literally billions with a B of dollars on travel and entertainment throughout the year on university recruiting. I think a lot more virtual interviewing and virtual assessments. I think the virtual recruitment process will absolutely be here to stay. Companies have realized that they can save a lot of money and drive a lot of efficiencies, and they don't have that much lower of an offer acceptance rate. And meanwhile, students can be a lot more picky about where they're going to end up, because they can, instead of, I can now interview for 3 companies in one day, or 3 companies in 2 days, as opposed to before where I had to, fly out to each city and it might not be possible. So I think those are 2 of many trends that are going to be seen in 2022 and beyond.
Well, Liz, I want to thank you so much for being our guest. So much support and love. I'll just read one final comment from the director of Career Readiness, the Career Readiness Center at Excelsior College. We're a fully online college for non-traditional students, mostly adult workers and military. I always suggest WayUp and value the research and expertise all of you share. We use multiple platforms as you recommended. So thank you to everyone who joined us today for this incredible discussion with Liz Wessel, the CEO and founder of WayUp. As always, I want to summarize 3 of the key points that we heard from Liz. Number 1, virtual and hybrid are here to stay, but you can't just slap the word virtual on everything and think you're going to be successful. So make up for the gaps that we all experience with virtual by, as Liz recommended, being more personal, creating more unique experiences and opportunities to be less generic and higher engagement. I love that. Number 2, to university recruiters, look at the data, not just your anecdotes. It's not just about partnering with HBCUs. Get away from core schools and GPAs and look at the data of who is really applying and how to increase those numbers. And of course, WayUp and Capfinity are both partners who can help you do that. And number 3, advice to university career services. Embrace that students can find jobs in a variety of ways. We can't limit them to just jobs posted by the Career Center. Everybody looks for jobs everywhere, and career services will be more valuable to students the more they engage with all the different ways that people find jobs there. So thank you to Liz Wessel. We'll give you a final word in a moment, but I wanted to invite everyone to join us here again in 2 weeks for episode 24 on Friday, November 5th, where we will invite our friend Erica Keswin, who is an author of 2 books, Bring Your Human to Work and Rituals Roadmap. And she will be talking about the importance of rituals and humanity as we engage in this virtual environment. So Liz, final thoughts for the audience.
If you want to hear more, join us on November 16th. Nikki and I will be doing this awesome webinar. But outside of that, Lindsay, I'm very impressed that you summarized that 30 minutes so well into like 1 minute. That's impressive.
It's her superpower.
It's my job.
Yeah.
Love it. Well, thank you all so much. Again, Nikki and Lindsay, thank you so much for having me, and the whole Capfinity team. Thanks for organizing this. To the viewers, thank you for your awesome comments. And I guess if there's one takeaway, I hope it's like you'll get your hands on the data, because data tells the truth. And of course, their anecdotes are important, but please, if you're going to focus on DEI, focus on data. So that's my 2 cents.
Wise words. Well, thank you so much, Liz. Thank you, Lindsay. And we look forward to speaking again and presenting together in the future. And we'll see everyone in 2 weeks' time.